Revolutionary greetings, comrades. We meet once again on our Red Sunday, the 6th of March 2022. We continue discussing the program of the Zimbabwe Communist Party. As explained, we are focusing on the land question in Zimbabwe. I must admit that this is a broad subject, and our program deals with it briefly. A lot has been written about the land question in Zimbabwe. But what we want to point out in this discussion is that the struggle for national liberation was based on the question of land. It was not based on one man, one vote. One man, one vote became a political strategy because it was clearly understood that if the majority of black people were to participate in the electoral process, they would elect their own representatives. So this is why the liberation movement used this as a strategy to say, in resolving the crisis or in ending colonialism, we needed to implement a one man, one vote. So the struggle was not based on the right to vote. That was not why we went to war. We went to war because of the land that was taken from us by the British South African Company when it raised its flag on a hilltop in what is Harare today in 1890, beginning the long process of colonialism. And we did explain previously that colonialism developed alongside capitalism. So the struggle was about the restoration of our dignity, about the return of our land. We have dealt in other forums, and a lot of scholars have written about how the land was taken from us, or how we're dispossessed of land, sent to areas which were not productive, and the settlers taking the fertile land to themselves. So the uprising of 1896, the uprising of 1897, it was all about the restoration of our land, which had been taken from us. So the whole essence of the liberation struggle, it was about the land question. We have in other forums as well discussed the legal instruments that were used to forcibly take our land. For instance, the 1913 Lands Act that was promulgated by the regime, and the other pieces of legislation that made it possible for the colonial regime to take land from us. So the issue at hand is that we went to war to return back our land. The land belonged to indigenous African people. The settlers, through the British South African Company, came and took our land and were to fight to get our land back. But what we are highlighting in this program, which of course is not in detail, is that the Lancaster House talks concentrated most of its time discussing the land question. As we are saying that we went to war to regain our land. And And for the ceasefire to happen in 1979, 1980, there needed to have been an agreement on how the land was going to be retained to the majority of the black people in Zimbabwe. So the Lancaster House talks' biggest issue that was under discussion was the question of land. It was then agreed in the Lancaster House in 1979, 1980 that land was not going to be forcibly taken back from the settlers who had owned the land, who forcibly took it from us. Either they took it by force, using arms of war, or they used the legal instruments to take back our land. So then the agreement at the Lancaster House in 1979 was that there must be a willing buyer and a willing seller. It became as known as the willing buyer, willing seller principle. Simple meant that a person should indicate that they are willing to sell their land, which of course was our land. And then a government would then buy the land based on the market rates. So in the first decade of the majority rule, some land was made available through this principle. There were settlements that were done through this land, the Lancaster House principle. But that was not enough, because in most cases, government did not have money to buy land. So it meant it difficult to implement land reform. And of course, we will at some point discuss corruption in the allocation of land. But what happened was that those that held the land up to 1979, 1980 had to voluntarily sell their land, and most were not willing. And those that were willing, the land did not come cheap, and government did not have money to buy the land. But of course, we also know that in the 60s and in the 70s, some black people had to access some plots of land in some parts of the country, which of course was elitist. It was not for everyone. The majority of Zimbabweans had to squat in squalor conditions. So this principle of willing buyer, willing seller was for 10 years. So in 1990, the willing buyer, willing seller came to an end. It expired in 1990. But it was at the time again, as we spoke about in the last video, that we were on the verge of implementing the Economic Structure Adjustment Program. And the issue of property rights was raised to say government must respect or needed to respect property rights. And we know when liberals talk of respect to property rights, what it means. Because it is the capitalist class, as we said, that capitalism developed alongside colonialism, that had property. And here we're called to respect the rights of those that owned property, notwithstanding that the majority of the black people did not have access to land or to property. In 1992, after the expiry of the willing buyer, willing seller principle, government passed the Land Act, which allowed government to forcibly take land from white farmers. This was opposed to willing buyer, willing seller. But this again faced the hackers because government had to compensate in cash and the money was not available. As we discussed in the previous videos when we spoke about the debt that we kept on accumulating under the Economic Structural Adjustment Program. So government did not have enough money to compensate. So this program also faced serious challenges. It was at this time that villagers in Matabele and South in Matopo around 1995-1996, known as Ingama settlers, took matters to their own hands and they went to occupy farms within Matabele and South. Villagers also in Maswingo took matters into their own hands and they went to occupy land in some parts of Maswingo. Instead of government supporting what the villagers were doing, because villagers were saying the struggle for national liberation was on the return of land to the majority of black people. The struggle was not about the right to vote. As I've said, that the right to vote became a political tactic. Because why would we have gone to war for us to participate in the electoral process? When we were colonized, we had never participated in any election. Remember that colonialism ended the feudal society which we earned, and under feudalism, there were no elections. So why would we have gone to war for us to have the right to participate in the electoral process when under feudalism, we never went to an election? And the comrades, when we are discussing class struggles, comrades will understand that the next human stage of human development from feudalism was capitalism, which of course was accompanied by colonialism. So under feudalism, there were no elections. I think we've dealt with that part, the feudalism, how African states emerged. If we have not done much, we will return to that subject at some point. So the point that I'm demonstrating is that we never went to war for the right to vote. Today, some political activists or political leaders, they will climb on a rooftop and say, we went to war so that every person, every Zimbabwean has the right to vote. That was not it. It was a tactic because we knew, as I've explained, that if one man, one vote was to happen, it was the easiest way of ending white minority rule. But this is not why we went to war. So when villagers in Masvingo, post 1992, villagers in Matopo went to occupy land, they were arrested by the ZANU-PF-led government because they were accused of taking law into their own hands. They were accused of violating the laws of Zimbabwe, and they were arrested because this was not part of the political scheme which we later saw post 2000 by the ruling elite in Zimbabwe. So villagers had to be arrested for simple giving themselves what belongs to them or what belonged to them, land. Of course, we then saw, like we have seen other former liberation movements. We spoke in the last video about the new class that emerged. This class which we call the chiefs. That the political leadership became a class of its own and were known as chiefs, removed from the rest of us, sidelining in particular those that physically participated in the armed struggle, the war veterans. Comrades will recall what happened in 1997, 1998, the War Victim Compensation Fund, how it was looted when some senior politicians were claiming 100% disability and they were compensated. But the people that carried the guns, who were in the bush fighting, were not compensated. It was at this time, in 1997, when the war veterans started to mobilize themselves and said enough was enough, and they confronted the ruling elite, resulting in the war veterans being paid 50,000 Zim dollars in 1997. At the time, it was a lot of money. Economists, when they always trace back the rise of inflation, they refer to the day 1997 that then President Mugabe, without going to parliament or cabinet, simply announced that all veterans were to be paid 50,000 Zim dollars. And they traced the inflation there. But of course, the war veterans did not stop there. They then further went to say they needed to have access to land. Remember again that ZIPRA, the armed wing of ZAP, had during the war, or towards the end of the war, individually contributed to a company and other companies, of course, known as Nitram, that was going to be their investment vehicle. They put money together to buy land for their projects. Of course, we know that this was then taken by government. These are part of the properties that ZIPRA wants government to return back. But there was a plan by ZAP and the ZIPRA to say, once the war is over, not everyone was going to be in the Zimbabwe National Army. those demobilized needed to be integrated into society. And one of the issues that was said was that some will need to run projects, hence they to come together to raise this money, put together the money to acquire properties in the mainland. So in 1997, after being paid the $50,000 and other benefits, all veterans also wanted to have access to land. But this also happened at the time that the 1979 Constitution, remember that at the time in 1979, a constitution was written, which was a ceasefire document, which we continue to amend. And you know that by June 1997, civil society and the trade union movement had come together to constitute what was called the National Constituent Assembly. The view at the time was that the Lancaster House Constitution needed to be replaced, and a new constitution, people-driven constitution, had to be ushered in. In 1998, government responded by coming up with it called Government Commission on the Constitution, which was led by the late Edson Zob. So when the war veterans and the villagers wanted to occupy land, it happened at a time when there was this constitutional debate on what should have been in the constitution, or how the question of land needed to be resolved in the constitution. The National Constituent Assembly came up with its own draft constitution, and government came up with its own draft. What is interesting was that in the government constitutional draft, which of course was rejected at the February 2000 referendum, was that the land was going to be nationalized. So there was a proposal, a clause proposing the nationalization of land. This, of course, mobilized over 4,000 farmers who owned the land, white commercial farmers, who were opposed to the nationalization of land. And when this debate was happening at that period, remember we said, by 1991, the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions had ended its relationship with the ZANU-PF because there were differences ideological. ZANU-PF was going neoliberal, and the ZCTU was opposed to the Economic Structure Adjustment Program. And we said in the previous video that it wanted to establish or help to create a mass working party alongside the lines of the Labour Party in Britain. And the ZCTU, because it had helped to fund the National Constituent Assembly, which was running parallel to the government process of rewriting the Constitution to replace the 1979 Constitution. This came to the head in February 2000 when Zimbabwe had to go to a referendum on the constitution, and the clause on the land question was that land had to be nationalized. This, of course, meant that the white commercial farmers had to find ways of protecting or resisting the nationalization of land. You will also recall, comrades, that in 1999 in February, ZCTU and the broader progressive civil society had convened in Chitungwethu the National Working People's Convention, which of course laid the basis for the formation of a broad mass working people's party or movement, which later became known as the Movement for Democratic Change. But as the MDC gets established in June 2000, the ZCTU Extraordinary Congress then mandated its leadership to work towards the formation of this mass working class movement, which was then launched in September 1999 as the Movement for Democratic Change. As the MDC was launched, precisely to oppose the neoliberal agenda, as was implemented by ZANU-PF-led government in 1991. It was formed at a time when the country was discussing constitutional changes. Key to that was the question of land. Unfortunately for the Movement for Democratic Change, which for one reason or another, which probably we might discuss in another video, it found itself by 2000 voting alongside the white commercial farmers in rejecting the draft constitution in 2000. We will discuss at some point the reasons from the MDC, but the reasons that I know is that the MDC at the time wanted to test if indeed ZANU-PF was to be defeated in any election. The rejection was on the part of the MDC, not really ideological, in rejecting the 2000 draft constitution, and it was a blunder on the part of the MDC, and comrades in the MDC have spoken about that blunder. But that, of course, mobilized the white commercial farmers. Farmers in South Africa, white commercial farmers in South Africa, in Britain and the rest of the Western world, to support the MDC. Because to the commercial farmers in South Africa, they didn't want what was happening in Zimbabwe to happen in South Africa, where through constitutional reform, they were going to lose land, or land was going to be returned to its rightful owners. It was at the time that in 2000, then the Movement for Democratic Change and the TAG, Puppets of the West, stooges of imperialist forces, because it was seen as protecting the commercial interests of white commercial farmers in Zimbabwe. And it isolated itself from the rest of the progressive world. And it is yet to recover from that, even though today it's calling itself the Yellow Movement. We will talk about that later on. So it is now common cause that when the draft constitution was rejected, President Robert Mugabe accepted that accepted defeat, but went on to invade land. We will continue, our comrades, discussing the question of land. Please share your views, write your comments, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Amandla, comrades.